Right now, as you watch this, an enormous dome of superheated air is sitting motionless over the Arabian Peninsula, and beneath it, all at once, the nations of the Gulf are baking. Not one country, but many, simultaneously: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and their neighbors Qatar, Oman, and Iraq, all pinned under the same vast, relentless mass of heat. Temperatures across the region are climbing toward and past 50 degrees Celsius, around 122 Fahrenheit, in the hottest spots, and running several degrees above even the brutal seasonal average. It is one of the most intense heat events of the entire summer, and it is forecast to grip the peninsula for weeks. This is a genuinely extraordinary situation, an entire region of tens of millions of people held in the grip of a single continent-scale furnace at the same moment, sharing not merely a season, but one specific, identifiable mass of lethal air. But to understand what is really happening, and to separate the alarming truth from the exaggerations that inevitably swirl around events like this, we have to look carefully at what these numbers mean, what is truly a record and what is not, and why the whole Gulf baking at once is, in some ways, an even more significant story than any single broken record could be. Let us begin with an honest accounting, because precision matters and the subject attracts sensationalism like almost no other. It is absolutely true that the Gulf is in the grip of a severe, region-wide heat event, with temperatures in the most extreme locations reaching and exceeding 50 degrees Celsius, and the whole peninsula running well above its already punishing norms. That much is real and serious. But the claim that all of these countries are simultaneously breaking their heat records this week needs careful handling, because in the strict sense of all-time records, it is not quite what is happening. Each of these nations has an all-time temperature record that stands higher than what this week is producing. Kuwait, which regularly ranks among the hottest places on the entire planet, has recorded around 54 degrees Celsius in the past, one of the highest reliably measured air temperatures anywhere on Earth. The United Arab Emirates has an all-time record of around 52 degrees. Saudi Arabia's extremes sit in a similar range, and Bahrain, a low, humid island, has lower peak air temperatures still. This week's readings, extreme as they are running below those all-time marks. It is worth dwelling on those all-time records for a moment, because they place the current event in its proper and still frightening context. Kuwait's extreme, around 54 degrees Celsius recorded at a desert station about a decade ago, ranks among the highest air temperatures ever reliably measured anywhere on the planet, in the same rarefied and terrible company as Death Valley in California and a handful of other desert basins. Kuwait has posted readings above 50, 3 degrees more than once in recent years, confirming its status as one of the genuine furnaces of the Earth. The Emirates' record of roughly 52 degrees was set earlier this century. These are not ancient marks from a distant past. They were set within living memory, most of them within the last 25 years, which is itself a telling detail. When a region's all-time temperature records are clustered in the very recent past, rather than scattered across a long history, it is a signature of a warming climate, of a place whose extremes are being pushed higher in the present era. So even as we correct the claim that this specific week is breaking those records, we should notice that the records themselves are young, recently set, and part of an upward march. The current heat wave is running just below the top of a bar that has itself been rising rapidly. And that rising bar is the real story. So while the heat is genuinely severe and above average, it is more accurate to say the region is enduring an exceptionally intense, widespread heat wave than to say every country is shattering its historical record in the same 7 days. To ground this in the actual figures, consider what the meteorological offices across the region are reporting during this event. In the deserts on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, readings have topped 50 degrees Celsius. Kuwait's weather service has forecast daytime highs around 48 degrees, with the interior deserts hotter still. Saudi Arabia's National Meteorological Center projects that temperatures through August will run something like 2.5 degrees above the long-term average, part of an outlook giving a high probability of above normal heat stretching through the autumn. Forecasters describe the peak of this event as one of the most intense across the Arabian Peninsula, expected to persist for weeks. These are extraordinary, dangerous numbers, and the anomaly, the amount by which the heat exceeds the norm, is genuinely notable. But an anomaly of 2.5 degrees above average, striking a region whose average is already among the most extreme on Earth, is a different thing from a new all-time record, and it is worth keeping the two straight. The heat is exceptional in its breadth, and its persistence, and its intensity relative to the season. It is not, this week, rewriting the record books at the very top. Both of those things can be true at once, and the honest story holds them together rather than collapsing them into a single dramatic but inaccurate claim. There is a further caution worth issuing, because when heat like this strikes, wildly exaggerated numbers begin to circulate, and they do the truth a disservice. You may see claims of 63 degrees, 68 degrees, even higher, attributed to Gulf cities during heat waves. These figures are almost always one of two things, either surface temperatures. The reading of sun-baked asphalt or sand or metal, which can indeed soar far above the air temperature, or sensational forecasts and misreadings that do not reflect what a proper weather station measures in the shade. The actual air temperature, the number that meteorologists record and that matters for comparing against records, tops out in this region at around the low to mid-50s Celsius, even in the most extreme events in history. When you hear a number like 60 plus degrees, it is not a legitimate air temperature record, it is a surface reading or an exaggeration. The real numbers are frightening enough without inflation. A genuine air temperature near 50 degrees, sustained across an entire region, is a profound and dangerous event. It does not need to be dressed up as 63 to be alarming. So if this week is not shattering the all-time records, why is it still so significant, and in some ways more significant than a single record would be? The answer lies in that word we began with, simultaneity. What makes this event remarkable is not that any one thermometer is hitting an unprecedented high, but that the extreme heat is blanketing the entire region at once. And the reason for that is a specific and powerful meteorological phenomenon known as a heat dome. Understanding it is the key to the whole picture. A heat dome forms when a persistent, powerful zone of high pressure parks itself over a region and refuses to move. Under that high pressure, air descends from the upper atmosphere, and as it sinks it is compressed, and compression heats it, so the descending air grows hotter and hotter. That same high pressure clears the skies of cloud, letting the sun beat down unobstructed, and it acts like a lid, trapping the accumulating heat near the surface and preventing it from escaping. The result is a self-reinforcing bubble of extreme heat that can sit over an enormous area for days or weeks, and because the dome is so large, it does not respect national borders. It covers Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Bahrain all together, which is precisely why they are all baking at the same time. They are not each suffering a separate heat wave, they are sharing one enormous one. There is a reason the Gulf is so prone to these domes, and it lies in the region's fundamental geography and its place in the machinery of the atmosphere. The Arabian Peninsula sits within the Great Subtropical Belt, around the latitudes where the planet's atmospheric circulation causes air to descend and dry out, which is why the world's largest deserts cluster there in the first place. This descending, drying tendency makes the region a natural home for exactly the kind of persistent high pressure that builds a heat dome. Add to that the vast, flat sun absorbing expanses of sand, which heat rapidly and radiate that heat back into the air, and the warm seas that offer no cooling relief because they too are heated to extraordinary temperatures in summer. And you have a landscape almost purpose-built to generate and sustain extreme heat when a high-pressure system settles in. When one does, as now, it can lock into place for days or weeks, the descending air growing ever hotter, the cloudless skies admitting the full force of the sun day after day, the heat accumulating with nowhere to go. The dome becomes a kind of atmospheric siege, and the peninsula beneath it simply has to endure until the larger patterns of the atmosphere shift and finally dislodge it. This is why the event is measured not in hours but in weeks, and why forecasters can see it coming and watch it settle in, but can do nothing to hurry its departure. This is the genuinely important truth hiding beneath the imprecise headline. A region-wide heat dome is, in many ways, more dangerous than a single localized record because of what simultaneity does to a society's ability to cope. When one city bakes while its neighbors stay cool, help and resources can flow in from outside. The crisis is contained and supported. But when an entire region is engulfed at once, there is no cool neighbor to lend a hand. Every national power grid is strained simultaneously, all of them pushed toward their limits at the same moment by the collective demand of tens of millions of air conditioners running flat out. Every country's hospitals and emergency services face rising heat casualties at once. Every economy loses its outdoor working hours together. There is no relief valve, no nearby refuge, no spare capacity in the wider region to draw upon, because the wider region is in exactly the same predicament. The heat dome turns what might have been several manageable local crises into one vast, correlated emergency, and that correlation, that everything at once quality, is a distinct and underappreciated danger. It is the difference between one house on a street catching fire and every house on the street burning simultaneously. Consider, too, that the Gulf is not a uniform furnace, but a landscape of different heat, and the danger takes different forms in different places, even under the same dome. In the deep desert interiors, in the vast sandy expanses of Saudi Arabia and inland Kuwait, and the empty quarter of the way, the heat is a dry heat, and the air temperature is at its most extreme, pushing toward and past 50 degrees. There, the raw thermometer reading is the headline danger. But along the coasts, where most of the great cities actually sit, the story changes, because the shallow, bathwater warm waters of the Gulf load the air with humidity. In these coastal zones, in Bahrain and Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Kuwait City, the air temperature may read a few degrees lower than the desert interior, but the humidity pushes the felt temperature, the heat index, far higher and makes the heat far more lethal. Because the moisture in the air prevents sweat from evaporating and crippling the body's ability to cool itself. So under a single heat dome, the interior deserts post the terrifying raw numbers, while the humid coasts, where the people are, endure a heat that is deadlier than its thermometer reading suggests. Both are dangerous. They are simply dangerous in different ways. And a full picture of the event has to hold both. Now, having been careful to say that this week is not necessarily shattering all-time records, we come to the place where the language of records is entirely justified, and it is the most important part of the whole story, the long-term trend. Because while any single week may or may not break a historical mark, the trajectory of Gulf heat over the decades is unmistakable. And it is a story of records climbing steadily upward. The all-time highs that stand today, Kuwait's 54 degrees, the Emirates' 52, were themselves set relatively recently, within the past couple of decades, part of a clear pattern in which the region's extreme heat has been intensifying. The Gulf is warming faster than the global average, and the number of dangerously hot days each year is rising sharply. Research produced by a coalition studying heat in the region has projected that under continued warming, cities like Abu Dhabi could see the number of days above 40 degrees nearly double by the end of the century, and that countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia could face something like 180 days a year, half the year, above 40 degrees. So the honest framing is this. This particular week may not be breaking every all-time record, but it is a vivid example of a climate that is relentlessly breaking records over time, pushing the region's heat higher and its extreme seasons longer, decade after decade. The records are indeed falling. They are just falling on the scale of years and decades, rather than in a single week, and that longer trend is far more consequential than any one 7-day period. This distinction matters enormously, because it is the difference between a weather story and a climate story. A single record-breaking day is weather. It is dramatic, but it passes. A steady, decades-long escalation of heat, in which the extremes climb higher and the hot season stretches longer and events like this week's become more frequent and more intense, is climate, and it is the thing that actually reshapes how and whether people can live in a region. The heat dome sitting over the Gulf this week is a single instance. But it is an instance of a phenomenon that is becoming more common. Heat domes of this intensity and persistence are, on current trajectories, expected to occur more often as the planet warms, which means the Gulf can expect more weeks like this one, and hotter, in the years ahead. So even though the strict claim that all four countries are breaking their records this exact week overstates the immediate meteorology, it points almost accidentally at a deeper truth. This region genuinely is on a record-breaking trajectory, and weeks like this are the visible face of it. The human stakes of all this are severe, and they fall, as they always do, most heavily on those least able to escape. Under a region-wide heat dome, the millions of outdoor workers across the Gulf, the construction crews and delivery riders and laborers who build and run these cities, face conditions that push the human body to its limits, laboring in 50-degree heat or in humid coastal air whose felt temperature is deadlier still. The midday work bans that most Gulf states enforce offer some protection during the hottest afternoon hours, but they do not cover the dangerous mornings and evenings, and a heat dome of this intensity keeps the danger elevated around the clock. The elderly, the sick, the poor with unreliable cooling all face heightened risk. And a simultaneous region-wide event means the emergency is unfolding everywhere at once, with no external relief. The heat also strains the very systems people depend on to survive it. The demand for electricity to power cooling soars to its peak precisely when the grid is most stressed by the heat, and a widespread failure during an event like this. The nightmare scenario that haunts every utility in the region would turn the cooled refuges on which millions depend into deadly traps within hours. The stakes of a heat dome are not abstract. They are measured in strained grids, filled hospitals, and, too often, in lives. The coastal humidity adds a particularly sinister dimension to the danger during an event like this, one that the raw desert temperatures can obscure. Scientists measure the ultimate limit of survivable heat with a figure called the wet bulb temperature, which accounts for humidity and represents the point beyond which the human body can no longer cool itself at all, even at rest, in shade. With unlimited water. That absolute threshold sits around 35 degrees Celsius of wet bulb temperature, and newer research suggests the real limit for many people may be lower still. The humid coasts of the Gulf are among the very few places on Earth that, during the most extreme events, begin to approach this frightening line. So while the desert interior posts the eye-catching 50-degree air temperatures, it is often the humid coastal cities, where the great majority of the population actually lives, that come closest to the true edge of human survivability, because there the combination of high heat and high moisture pushes the body's cooling system past the point of function. A heat dome that drives both the dry interior and the humid coast to their respective extremes simultaneously is therefore threatening two different populations in two different ways at once, and both are being pushed toward limits that not so long ago were considered largely theoretical. There is also a quieter economic and social dimension to a region-wide heat event that deserves mention, because its effects ripple far beyond the immediate danger. When an entire region's outdoor economy grinds toward a halt at once, when construction slows, when the hours in which anything can be done outside shrink to the cool margins of the night, the cumulative cost is enormous, and it is borne across the whole region simultaneously. Schools, already on their summer break during the worst of it, structure their calendars around the heat. Businesses lose productive hours. The whole rhythm of life compresses into the air-conditioned indoors and the cooler night, as it does every summer. But under an intense dome, that compression is total. And because the event spans borders, there is a shared quality to the ordeal. A sense across the Gulf of a region collectively enduring, collectively waiting for the dome to break. It is a reminder that extreme heat, unlike many disasters, is not a localized event with a clear edge, but a vast, diffuse condition that settles over everything and everyone at once, pressing on every aspect of life until it lifts. There is no evacuation from a heat dome, no line beyond which one can drive to safety, because the dome may span 1,000 miles in every direction. One can only retreat inward into the cooled interior and wait for eventual relief. So let us return, at the end, to the claim we began with and answer it as honestly as the evidence allows. Are Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia all breaking heat records in the same week? The precise answer is nuanced. They are not, in the strict sense, all simultaneously shattering their all-time national temperature records this week, those historic marks. Kuwait's 54 degrees and the rest stand higher than the current readings, and the sensational figures of 60 degrees and beyond that circulate during such events are surface temperatures or exaggerations, not legitimate air temperature records. But what is happening is arguably more significant than a single broken record. An enormous heat dome has settled over the entire Arabian Peninsula, baking all of these nations simultaneously with temperatures near and above 50 degrees. One of the most intense and widespread heat events of the season, straining every grid and endangering every population at once, with no cool neighbor to offer relief. And beneath that immediate event runs the deeper and more troubling truth that the Gulf is on an unmistakable long-term trajectory of climbing heat records, warming faster than the global average, its extreme days multiplying, and its historic highs having been set within recent memory. This week may not break the all-time records, but it is a preview of a region where the records will keep breaking year after year as the heat domes grow more frequent and more fierce. The whole Gulf baking at once is not a curiosity or a headline to be inflated. It is a warning written across an entire peninsula at a single moment of the kind of heat that a warming world is bringing, and of the extraordinary and mounting challenge of sustaining human life beneath it.